Something unprecedented just happened to America's labor market tracking system, and almost nobody is talking about it. An entire month of critical employment data has vanished, and what we can see from the fragments that remain paints a deeply concerning picture about where we're headed economically. The numbers that did surface before the data blackout revealed troubling patterns. Unemployment climbing to levels we haven't witnessed in years, consecutive downward revisions erasing thousands of previously reported jobs, and entire sectors of the economy showing clear signs of contraction. Meanwhile, economists are increasingly vocal about recession probabilities intensifying as we move toward 2026. But here's what makes this situation truly alarming. Buried within the last complete report we received, there's a specific metric that economic analysts say could be the most critical indicator of what's coming next year. And right now, it's flashing warning signs that most people haven't even noticed yet. Here's what happened behind the scenes. The Bureau of Labor Statistics made an extraordinary announcement. They would not be releasing the October employment report at all. This wasn't a delay or a partial release. The entire monthly snapshot simply doesn't exist. The reason? Federal employees responsible for conducting the household survey couldn't complete their work during the government shutdown. Now, you might think this is just about payroll numbers from businesses, but the household survey captures something far more important. It measures unemployment rates, tracks labor force participation, identifies how many Americans are working multiple part-time jobs just to make ends meet, and reveals whether people are dropping out of the workforce entirely. Without this survey, the BLS cannot calculate the unemployment rate. They cannot determine how many workers left the labor force out of frustration. They cannot track the rise in Americans forced to cobble together multiple part-time positions instead of finding full-time work. They cannot measure the participation rates among older workers who should be retiring, but financially cannot. The agency made a decisive call. They would not publish a partial report with missing pieces. They stated clearly that even after government operations resume, this household survey data cannot be reconstructed retroactively. The October unemployment rate, the count of unemployed Americans, the monthly change in these figures, all of it is gone permanently. Think about what this means. Economists rely on continuous monthly data to identify inflection points in the labor market. Is unemployment rising gradually? Is it accelerating? Is it stabilizing? These questions require unbroken data series. When you're trying to spot a turning point in the economy, missing an entire month is like trying to navigate with a map that has a crucial section torn out. This gap fundamentally undermines short-term trend analysis. It injects massive uncertainty into assessments of where the economy is actually heading, and it creates blind spots at precisely the moment when clarity matters most. The situation gets worse. The November employment report has also been delayed until December 16th. That timing is critical because Federal Reserve policymakers have their next major meeting scheduled for December 9th through 10th. They'll be making consequential decisions about interest rates, decisions that affect mortgage costs, credit card rates, business loans, and the entire trajectory of economic growth without access to the current labor market data they normally depend on. It's like asking a pilot to land a plane in fog without instruments. The decisions still have to be made, but they're being made with significantly less information than usual. Before the data blackout, we received September's employment report, and the details within it tell a story that contradicts the headline number. Yes, the economy added 119,000 jobs. On the surface, that sounds positive, but when you examine what's happening beneath that number, the picture becomes far more concerning. The unemployment rate jumped to 4.4%. That's the highest level we've seen since October 2021. Now, 4.4% doesn't sound catastrophic in isolation, but context matters enormously here. Historically, When unemployment rises consistently across multiple months, even from low starting points, it serves as an early warning system for deteriorating labor conditions. The headline job gains can still look acceptable while the foundation is quietly crumbling underneath. Then there are the revisions to previous months, and this is where things get genuinely alarming. August's job gains, which were originally reported as 22,000 new positions, were revised to show a loss of 4,000 jobs. That's not a minor adjustment. That's a complete reversal from growth to contraction. July was also revised downward, from 79,000 jobs added to just 72,000. When multiple consecutive months get revised downward, it reveals something important. The initial data overstated the strength of hiring. Employers were pulling back more aggressively than anyone realized at the time. The economy looked healthier in real time than it actually was. Now let's dig into what's happening at the sector level, because this is where the divergence becomes stark. Healthcare and government positions continued adding jobs. But look at retail, transportation, temporary health services, and manufacturing. These sectors showed weakness or outright contraction. Pay particular attention to temporary health services because this sector functions as a canary in the coal mine. When companies face economic pressure, they reduce temporary staff before they start cutting full-time employees. It's the first line of defense when labor costs need to come down. Weakness in temporary hiring is an established leading indicator for broader labor market deterioration. Wage growth is slowing as well. When you see rising unemployment paired with decelerating wage growth, it signals a fundamental shift in bargaining power. Workers have less leverage. Demand for labor is weakening. Employers don't need to compete as aggressively for talent. And here's the maddening part. Without the October report, we cannot determine whether these September trends continued, worsened, or somehow reversed. We're flying blind at exactly the wrong moment. Here's the disconnect that frustrates millions of Americans. The September report technically showed job gains. Economists and policymakers point to positive headline numbers, but the vast majority of Americans are not experiencing conditions that feel remotely like improvement. Their day-to-day financial reality tells a completely different story. This is what economists call a K-shaped economy, and it's one of the most insidious economic patterns because it hides crisis within aggregate averages. Some groups are doing fine or even thriving, while others are experiencing genuine hardship. When you average these experiences together, you get numbers that look acceptable but mask the reality of millions of households. Higher income households have remained relatively insulated. Their employment tends to be concentrated in sectors that weather economic slowdowns more effectively: technology, finance, professional services, and management. Many benefited significantly from stock market gains over recent years. Property values in desirable areas appreciated substantially. These households typically have emergency savings, diversified assets, and the financial cushion to absorb inflation without fundamentally altering their lifestyle. But lower and middle income households are experiencing something entirely different, and their struggle is intensifying. These families dedicate a far larger percentage of their income to essential expenses: groceries, rent or mortgage payments, utilities, gasoline, car insurance, health insurance. These are the exact categories where prices have surged most dramatically and stubbornly remained elevated. Even when inflation moderates, that means prices are rising more slowly, not falling. A grocery bill that increased by 30% doesn't come back down just because inflation drops from 8% to 3%. It stays elevated. And for households already stretched thin, this sustained price level creates relentless financial pressure. Wage increases for these workers, when they occur at all, have not kept pace with the cumulative price increases across essential categories. Many households lack meaningful emergency savings. A $500 unexpected expense becomes a crisis that requires borrowing, delaying other payments, or making impossible choices between necessities. The evidence for this divide appears everywhere if you know where to look. Major retailers have reported behavioral patterns that confirm this split. Target and Home Depot report customers pulling back sharply on discretionary purchases. People are buying what they absolutely need and cutting everything else. Chipotle and Coca-Cola have documented customers trading down to more affordable options, smaller sizes, generic brands, anything to reduce costs. Even Walmart, traditionally positioned for budget-conscious shoppers, reports that households earning above $100,000 annually represent one of their fastest-growing customer segments. Think about what that means. Higher-income households are increasingly shopping at discount retailers to manage costs. The financial pressure is spreading upward through income brackets. The labor market data reflects this bifurcation clearly. Job gains are increasingly concentrated in a narrow set of industries, primarily healthcare, government, and some professional services. Meanwhile, consumer-facing sectors like retail, hospitality, food service, and transportation show minimal hiring or actual declines. Workers in these sectors face unpredictable hours, limited wage growth, few benefits, and maximum exposure to rising living costs. For older Americans, particularly those on fixed incomes, this economic divide carries profound consequences. Prices remain elevated across categories that dominate senior spending: healthcare, housing, utilities, insurance, food. Social Security adjustments provide some relief, but they lag behind actual cost increases and don't fully restore purchasing power lost during high inflation periods. Higher interest rates, implemented to combat inflation, have increased costs for seniors carrying credit card balances, taking out loans, or paying premiums on certain types of supplemental insurance. Many older workers who supplement their retirement income through part-time work are seeing reduced hours, stagnant wages, or difficulty finding positions as employers cut back. This fundamental split explains why headline job numbers can show growth while the majority of families feel like they're losing ground. It's why consumer confidence remains depressed despite positive economic data. And it's why losing an entire month of labor market data makes it exponentially harder to understand the true depth of strain American households are experiencing right now. The unemployment rate hitting 4.4% might not trigger alarm bells for casual observers. After all, by historical standards, 4.4% still represents a relatively low level. But focusing solely on the absolute level misses the entire point. Direction matters more than position. Over the past year, unemployment has been climbing gradually but persistently. This pattern is precisely what concerns economists most. It's rarely the high absolute unemployment rate that signals approaching recession. It's the trajectory, the slow but steady increase from a low base that historically precedes broader labor market deterioration and economic contraction. There's a well-established pattern in economic data. Unemployment tends to rise slowly at first, then accelerates. The early phase looks manageable, even dismissible. Then conditions deteriorate rapidly. By the time unemployment is obviously high, the recession is already well underway and damage is done. The early warning signs are subtle, which is exactly why experts monitor them so carefully. Another critical metric is the employment-to-population ratio, specifically for prime-age workers, those aged 25 to 54. This ratio ticked downward in the September report. What this means is that a smaller percentage of people in their prime working years, people who should be most active in the labor market, are actually employed. Declines in this measure often signal deteriorating job opportunities. When prime-age workers aren't working, it's typically not by choice. It means the jobs aren't there, or the available jobs don't pay enough to justify the costs of working. or people have become discouraged after unsuccessful job searches. This metric cuts through demographic shifts and reveals underlying labor market health more clearly than headline unemployment rates. Labor force participation rates present another concern, particularly among older workers. If participation stagnates or decreases, it often reflects discouragement or genuine difficulty finding employment. Some workers leave the labor force and get classified as not looking for work, which means they disappear from unemployment statistics entirely, even though they would prefer to be working. These indicators become clearer through continuous household survey data, which captures detailed information about work status, job search activity, and reasons for not working. This is precisely the data that disappeared with the October report. Without the October unemployment rate, analysts cannot determine whether the increase to 4.4% was a temporary fluctuation or confirmation of an accelerating upward trend. That single missing data point injects enormous uncertainty into recession risk models. It's not that 1 month proves a recession is inevitable. It's that the absence of that month makes it impossible to confirm or refute whether concerning September trends continued into fall. When you step back and look at the complete picture, multiple warning signals are converging simultaneously, and that convergence is what elevates risk substantially. We have rising unemployment, a trend that rarely reverses without intervention. We have consecutive downward revisions to payroll data, indicating the labor market was weaker than real-time reporting suggested. We have wage growth decelerating, reducing consumer spending power. We have uneven hiring concentrated in a few sectors, while others contract. We have clear evidence of weakening consumer behavior across income levels. And now, we have lost an entire month of critical labor market data. No single one of these factors guarantees a recession is imminent. Economic systems are complex and resilient in ways that make predictions difficult. But these factors don't exist in isolation. They interact and reinforce each other. Rising unemployment reduces spending. Reduced spending leads to further job cuts. Further job cuts increase unemployment. These feedback loops, once they gain momentum, become difficult to reverse. The missing October report eliminates the ability to confirm whether September's weakness was an isolated anomaly or the beginning of sustained deterioration. Was 4.4% unemployment a temporary spike that would have reversed in October? Or did it continue climbing? We simply don't know, and that uncertainty itself becomes a risk factor. The delayed November report creates additional problems for policymakers. The Federal Reserve meets in early December to determine interest rate policy. Their decisions influence borrowing costs for businesses, mortgage rates for homebuyers, credit availability for consumers, and the overall pace of economic activity. Normally, Fed officials would have October and November employment data available before this meeting. They would understand the current state and recent trajectory of the labor market. This time, they'll have September data that's now 2 months old, and they'll be making decisions that will shape early 2026 economic conditions without knowing what actually happened in October or November until after their meeting concludes. It's decision-making under profound uncertainty, which typically leads to either overcaution or misjudgment. If the Fed keeps interest rates too high for too long because they're uncertain about labor market conditions, they risk pushing the economy into recession unnecessarily. If they cut rates too aggressively without adequate data, they risk reigniting inflation. Neither outcome serves the broader economy well. For seniors and retirees, these intersecting trends carry particularly serious implications that extend well beyond abstract economic indicators. Prolonged elevated interest rates affect multiple aspects of financial life. Credit card debt becomes more expensive to carry. Home equity loans and lines of credit cost more. For retirees considering relocating or downsizing, higher mortgage rates make housing less affordable. Certain types of supplemental insurance premiums rise with interest rates. These aren't hypothetical concerns, they're real monthly costs that eat into fixed incomes. Market volatility, which tends to increase during periods of economic uncertainty, directly impacts retirement savings. Many retirees depend on investment portfolios to supplement Social Security and pension income. When markets swing wildly or enter sustained downturns, it forces difficult decisions about whether to continue planned withdrawals or reduce spending to preserve capital. Persistent inflation, even at moderate levels, erodes purchasing power relentlessly for those on fixed incomes. Social Security cost of living adjustments help, but they're backward-looking and don't fully compensate for price increases in real time. A retiree who budgeted carefully 5 years ago finds that same budget no longer covers the same lifestyle today. Healthcare costs deserve special mention because they represent a growing portion of senior spending and have increased faster than general inflation. Medicare premiums, supplemental insurance, prescription drug costs, dental care, vision care, all of these expenses have climbed substantially. For retirees on limited incomes, healthcare inflation can force devastating trade-offs with other necessities. As economic uncertainty increases, financial planning becomes exponentially more difficult. Should you reduce spending now to build reserves? Should you continue normal spending and hope conditions improve? Should you take on part-time work if you're physically able, or is that job market tightening? These questions lack clear answers in uncertain times, and that uncertainty itself creates stress and anxiety. Public confidence tends to weaken during extended periods of uncertainty, and that confidence decline becomes self-reinforcing. When people feel uncertain about economic conditions, they pull back on spending, which worsens economic conditions, which increases uncertainty further. Breaking this cycle requires clear information and credible policy responses, both of which are more difficult when critical data is missing. The missing employment report didn't create these challenges. The underlying economic weaknesses existed before the data blackout. But the absence of this information makes every challenge harder to evaluate, harder to plan for, and harder to address through policy intervention. There's a final dimension to this situation that deserves attention: what the missing data reveals about institutional fragility during a period when institutional reliability matters more than ever. Government shutdowns have occurred before, but losing an entire month of core economic data represents a new level of dysfunction. The employment report isn't peripheral information. It's foundational data that businesses, investors, policymakers, and households rely on to make critical decisions. When that data disappears, it injects uncertainty into millions of economic decisions simultaneously. Markets function on information. The more reliable and complete the information, the more efficiently markets can allocate resources. When key information goes missing, markets become less efficient, price discovery becomes less accurate, and the risk of mispricing assets increases. This isn't theoretical. It affects mortgage rates, stock valuations, business investment decisions, and hiring plans. The timing is particularly unfortunate because we're at a potential inflection point where accurate information matters most. If the economy is entering a downturn, early recognition enables earlier policy responses, which can mitigate severity. Delayed recognition means delayed responses, which typically means deeper economic pain before recovery begins. Looking ahead to 2026, the combination of weakening labor market signals, persistent inflation pressures, elevated interest rates, and now information gaps creates a challenging environment for economic stability. None of these factors make recession inevitable, but they meaningfully increase the probability and potential severity if a downturn does materialize. So where does this leave us? We're navigating an economy showing multiple signs of weakness, dealing with a significant data gap at a critical moment, and facing policy decisions that will shape economic conditions for the year ahead, all while millions of Americans experience daily financial strain that doesn't show up clearly in aggregate statistics. The missing October employment report matters not because it would have definitively answered all economic questions, but because it would have provided crucial information about whether concerning September trends continued or reversed. That unknown creates uncertainty, and uncertainty in financial markets and economic policy often produces worse outcomes than bad news itself. For individuals and families, especially those on fixed incomes or in financially vulnerable positions, this environment demands heightened attention to financial resilience. Building emergency reserves when possible, reducing unnecessary expenses, understanding your actual monthly spending patterns, these basic financial practices become more important during uncertain times. For policymakers, this situation should prompt serious reflection about the fragility of critical economic data infrastructure and the consequences when that infrastructure fails during moments when information is most crucial. And for all of us trying to understand where the economy is actually headed, it requires looking beyond headline numbers to the underlying details, recognizing that aggregate statistics can mask the real experiences of millions of households, and understanding that sometimes what we don't know matters as much as what we do. The question isn't whether to be concerned. The data we have provides ample reason for concern. The question is whether we'll take this economic moment seriously enough to prepare adequately, demand better information systems, and insist on policies that address the real financial strain American families are experiencing, not just the abstract indicators that look acceptable when averaged across vastly different circumstances. Because ultimately, economic statistics aren't just numbers on spreadsheets. They represent jobs, incomes, families making difficult choices, and the financial security or insecurity of millions of people navigating an increasingly challenging environment. And right now, at this particular moment, we're trying to navigate that environment with a critical piece of our information system simply missing.